All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our monthly meeting where we prepare for the next month's editorial calendar theme. So for everyone following along, we have our reporters here from each of our markets, which include DC, Baltimore, Delaware, and Philadelphia. We are representing each of those markets here, and I'm managing editor Julie Zeglen, representing HQ in Philadelphia. So we are talking about Community Building Month. So first of all, important to note that we originally had April slated for Community Building Month, and then a global crisis happened in the form of a pandemic. So we thought maybe we should pivot a little bit in startup terms to adjust to that. So last month instead, we devoted extra reporting to healthcare technologies. So that involved covering startups that changed some of their modeling to focus on serving healthcare workers, for instance. We talked to investors who gave advice about investing during a pandemic, especially for health tech companies. We also checked in with life science companies about vaccines that they're developing, things like that. And so we pushed community building to May. And so we're thinking about this month differently than we had previously when we set the editorial calendar way back in December, because originally we said that the month was going to focus on incubators, meetups, mentorship, and the bigger questions of what does authentic community development look like and who's been working behind the scenes to better connect their local tech ecosystems. So those things are still relevant, of course, but they look different now that we can't meet in person. So now in May 2020, amid a pandemic, we're thinking more about how local tech communities gather virtually, what it looks like when they cannot see each other in person, and also how the community adjusts to a crisis moment collectively. So what we're going to do this month is what we do a lot of with our editorial calendar themes. We're going to be doing Q&As with people who are working in those spaces. We will probably still look into meetups and things like that that have pivoted to be online. But we're also going to be introducing the Realist Connectors. And so that is the evolution of our Realist series, which includes, of course, our Realist Startups, an annual list of promising young companies, and the Realist Engineers, which we introduced this past fall. That's a list of up-and-coming and also like long-standing software developers in each of our communities. Basically the people in the companies who you should know. So this version, the Realist Connectors, is the people you should know who, if you're new to Baltimore tech, for instance, and you're trying to get into the community, try to understand what it is. These are the 50 people who you should at least know the names of, if not be meeting for coffee. So let's get started by first discussing that broader topic that I mentioned up top. So what is community? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by community building at a time when we can't meet in person? Stephen, I know that you've thought a lot about this. Do you want to kick that conversation off?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of the tech community that we've always kind of focused around was, the idea of the collection of companies and, folks that are trying to build them basically broadly. So, whether that's, the founders that are working themselves or the accelerator leaders or the people who run incubators or the investors who are kind of backing them, or, and then we have, kind of maybe there's meetups, around that are around skills building and with certain tech tools or in certain disciplines. I mean, the way I've always kind of thought about it was that, there's like everyone's kind of off building their own thing a lot of times, and then the community is kind of the place where they come together, sort of. And I know one thing that I've been feeling as I have been reporting, for the past month and a half since we've had the stay-at-home order, is the place that they so often do come together, and frankly, that's a huge source of story ideas for me. And it is those events that whether it's a meetup or a happy hour or a demo day, where you kind of can see everyone and see what they're working on and hear a little, catch up with folks and see what's going on. So I think that we have seen a big shift in how we have been thinking about that and how to, and I think, yeah, and I mean, in a lot of ways, I think, it'll be interesting to see what kind of things people are coming up with to bring folks together. Like I've been to a couple happy hours with meetup groups, but over the past month, and they've definitely, and I'm speaking on a panel that's like the classic, like pitch the press, where journalists are the ones that are on the panel this time, talking to folks who might be interested in coverage later in the month. So, but yeah, just how those events that we're all so used to that have kind of been built up over time, how they're kind of evolving and pivoting now that, we can't meet in person. So.
Yeah. Paige, Michelai, Holly, I guess, have you given any thought to what it means, especially now, or like what you're seeing in your reporting for how people are still gathering, or what community means to them now?
Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think collaboration is a part of it. I've seen a lot of community members, startup community and things like that. I've done already like a lot of collaboration pieces and people looking for more people to get involved in projects and things like that. So I think that is one other part of it.
Yeah, totally.
For me, of course, just paying attention to the different types of ways people are connecting outside of the obvious, like Zoom and Slack channels and things like that. But it also made me recall like my first 2 weeks to my first month working at Technically. I kind of got like a list of people I should know, and I kind of recalled back to that. And it's prompted me to want to check in with these people, things that they're doing, because they were my first few, coffee meetings in DC, or, I first found out about certain meetup groups and just pitch competitions, and I've been covering them for 2 years now. So it'll be interesting to see how those type of events and groups transform during the pandemic. Also want to see how things are changing. Like if you're not able to, of course, a lot of things can go virtual, but some things can't. And if they can't, what else are you in the community offering or doing to, support technologists at a time like this? So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the technologies that people we're already using to connect, like Slack, for example, I think those communities are just as active. Like they were already in place. Those infrastructures were already kind of working. People are just kind of leaning on them a little bit extra right now. And to kind of add to what everyone else said, I do think that the people who are kind of leading the charge right now are people who had kind of already been doing that. They were probably already people who we looked to get a good understanding of what was going on with a certain trend, or, they've started a couple companies, or they're already ones hosting, in-person meetups. Those are the people who are kind of continuing that right now and figuring out the new ways to keep it going. So I don't think like the past month and a half has radically changed like who we consider to be connective. It's just kind of like those people that we've kind of always leaned on seem to be the ones who are kind of continuing that virtually.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned Slack, and that reminded me of a couple of stories that I've had in mind for how we could think about this theme even now. So that includes, like, Paige, you did a deep dive on Philly Tech Slack channels. Mm-hmm. Stephen, just recently you wrote about how Baltimore demo days were pivoting to be virtual. Michelai, you wrote about how companies are moving virtual with their programming, like accelerators, as well as just how coworkers are staying connected. And I think, side note is that I think that companies can be considered communities in a way, at least as like facets or supporters of the larger tech community. And then Holly, you wrote about how the arts and music scene is now all online. It has, just like by nature of like, normally you'd go to a concert and see a musician, but now they're moving to Facebook Live or whatever. And that's, showing some ingenuity. Yeah, so I think those are all important call outs. How about, let's talk about some broader story ideas. So of course the stories I just mentioned could be sort of jumping off points, but what are some other themes that we should be thinking about this month? Maybe not mentioning specific people or organizations necessarily, but I think like moving demo days online is a good example of something that we could pursue in all markets, because it's certainly happening in all markets. But it moves
Yeah,
to be
I think.
expensive. Yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I think there's, and I think, you know, maybe out of that is kind of a couple different story ideas in and of itself, as far as, you know, as we're always trying to offer resources to folks. You know, I think I'd be interested in kind of, one thing I kind of made sure to ask everyone was like, what tools are you kind of using to, you know, to help in this transition? And I think that, you know, there might even be there could almost be like a resource list in and of itself, and kind of the tools that will help you, you know, build community online, or, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it was when, you know, people were talking a lot about just sort of the, you know, how do you kind of design a program, you know, knowing that this might be the reality, sort of not just for a couple months here, but, you know, but, you know, if you're a university, you may or may not be thinking about, you know, what's going to happen in the fall semester. So obviously we're getting a lot of mixed messages about that, but I guess my point is just, you know, how you're designing something that to kind of be sustainable, or the thing I was thinking a lot about was, you know, what will some of these changes that are being made now kind of be implemented, you know, like going permanently, kind of going forward. Like, you know, if you're running an accelerator program, like, do you always have to meet in person once a week, or could you add like a virtual check-in to even get another touch point almost? So
Yeah.
So
And in addition to that too is like stories about how, like, just like the mental process of making these decisions. So I'm thinking about how we had to move Philly Tech Week virtual. So I don't think that is something that will stay for the long term, but we are developing these skills in the meantime. Like, we're going to figure out how to do a virtual introduced. You know, we've already hosted public like Zoom meetings basically. So I would love to read about, like, I don't know, horror stories of like Zoom meetings gone wrong or something like that, or like an accelerator that did not work out. Like they tried to go virtual, and just like, here's what they learned from it, or something like that.
I think it
was,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Paige. Oh,
okay.
I think my favorite part. I'm gonna stop. Nope.
Okay, I think that I was already kind of thinking about meetups, obviously, during this time of connectivity, that you automatically think of, you know, the existing communities. Julie and I had already talked about, you know, certain people to talk to for that, especially after a stakeholder meeting that we had in early March, which seems like years ago at this point. But because it feels so long ago, I think there's a lot to be said about like how these existing communities have transitioned existing online, if it's been successful for them, what it takes to pull off like a successful meetup, and what that means for folks, whether it's like, you know, we have a lot of, in Philly at least, you know, a lot of very professional development focused meetups, like you might have like Girls Who Code or DevOps meetup or whatever. So how do you continue making that like productive and meaningful for people in this era? And also just like what makes a successful virtual meetup. You know, like we have 5 people on this call and we've already talked over each other a couple of times, which is just how it goes when you're on a video call. So how do you like manage all the inner workings of like the difficulty of virtual meetings on top of already like wondering about how to make them successful and like worthwhile for the people who are taking time out of their day to attend them?
I also think it'd be interesting to find out more about, if we're able to, what happens to the financial support that goes into accelerators to host in-person programs, or even sponsorships, how are they leveraging that type of support? Because essentially they're not renting out spaces to host these big events. They're not, they may not have to be using as much of this money to go towards putting on such a huge event if it's going virtual. So how are they using these financial resources differently? If they are they able to put them back into the entrepreneurs in a different way? Are they able to use the money differently? Are they able to kind of repurpose it to support them during this hard time, which would be nice. So I'd be interested to see that. I know there's an incubator out here that's really well financially backed by just the DC government here, and it'd be interesting to see, what happens with that funding as they go virtual. But yeah, just seeing how incubators and accelerators are carried out in general. Like, of course, there's, the virtual presentations, but to me, there's nothing like having that in-person connection with being able to just work around people and be inspired by that type of energy. So I wonder, it'd be cool to dive into how some of these incubator leaders and accelerator leaders are still fostering those type of connections for entrepreneurs as they're still trying to build their ventures, even if they are at home alone. So yeah.
Yeah, speaking of types of connections, I'm also wondering, like, these meetups, a lot of people go to them because they are looking to connect or maybe meet a technical co-founder, or, they're looking for that actual networking aspect of the meetup, which is a lot harder to do, to just like casually run into someone or start a conversation, at the bar or something at a very normal in-person meetup. So I'm wondering this month that it's probably worthwhile to talk about the actual like in-person networking connection part of connecting. That's not just like, oh, you two people should know each other, but the like, how does that exist when every form of contact you have with someone is super intentional right now, because you have to set up a time to set aside, you have to pick a technology to like communicate through, and then you have to deal with all the technical things that come along with being on a virtual meeting versus just like casually running into someone.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and with that's really interesting. I also just think a lot about how folks want to be helpful, I think, and yeah, maybe this is restating a little bit, but the idea of like, how can you be like, what's actually helpful if you're trying to connect somebody, like how to be an operator or something like that. I don't know what the headline would be, but
Interesting. Are you speaking to like somebody who might hypothetically be included on a reel as connectors, like how they can teach other people to be connected?
Yeah, exactly. Almost. Yeah, maybe it could even come from a guest post that they could write, or we could talk to, email 5 founders or investors or 5 people from the list even, and ask them, hey, what's one thing that you always hold to, when you're making a connection, like, or something like that.
Yeah, that's reminding me too of, I feel like we've published a couple, like, here's how to network stories over the years, or at least gotten tips from people about, like, what's your one go-to tip for networking to make it authentic? And oftentimes the advice is like, don't talk to somebody as if you're trying to get something out of them. It's just like, talk to them like they're a person first, and build a relationship. And then eventually, like, you might be helpful to each other. So just saying that might be, I wouldn't be surprised if that were some of the advice that came through, for example.
Oh yeah, and we could do that article, but like virtual networking tips or something.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, a Q&A with someone who's been, like, again, somebody on the list, but a Q&A about how they are pivoting to being a connector online. We're talking about a lot of like pretty similar themes right now, but I would guess that somebody who like thinks of themselves as a star connector, probably the qualities that are essential to it still remain in the virtual time. But I mean, as you were just speaking to, it's not as organic right now. So what do you need to keep in mind when you're doing it online? So anyway.
The other thing I'm thinking a lot about is like when people come to me And as a reporter, and they say, a lot of times they're asking me, like, how can I get involved in the community? So I'm thinking a lot about like those kind of entry points, and if they're, you know, if we could tell a story of like how a company, you know, decided, like made a decision, intentionally said, I want to be more involved in my local city's, you know, startup or tech community or business community even, and, you know, here's how we considered it and here's what we decided to do. Because it's kind of, I don't know, I think there is a point where that kind of becomes less of a natural thing and more of like oh, we have to decide as a company that we're gonna, you know, put some resources toward this. So but even for a startup, you know, I think there's some that we've seen over the years that are just gung-ho about like community first, and that's pretty much how they make all the connections to get rolling. And others just kind of have, you know, seem to come out of nowhere overnight and you didn't even know they existed. And then all of a sudden they're, you know, raised $5 million or something like that. So, but maybe they'll decide a little bit later that they, you know, were interested in kind of giving back, so to speak. So, so yeah, no specific headline out of that yet, but yeah, that's one thing I'm definitely thinking about.
Yeah, I think mentorship plays into that as well. That's sort of a different version of what you're talking about, I think. But like somebody who, I think this is what you mean, like somebody who has already been an entrepreneur, founded companies, then giving back in the way of like mentoring other first-time founders or something like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that, or even just the company saying, you know, we want to do more to, like, maybe we'll offer our office space up to host a meetup, or maybe we'll, you know, put aside, you know, part of our, you know, like 10% time as a team toward working on community facing projects. Or, you know, I think there's been a few examples of that I've run into. And one thing that, you know, sometimes comes up when I'm having coffee with folks is where do I plug in? Like, what's the best thing for me to do to kind of, you know, to give back, so to speak, and be really present here in Baltimore, or, you know, whatever city I might be in. So.
Yeah.
It would be cool to ask that question to, like, we obviously, like, if you just say that, Stephen, I have people that immediately come to mind that I would point someone toward, but I think it'd be cool to ask those people to tell us their 5 people, who could then tell us like their 5 people.
Ooh, yes.
So that we end up with, like, it doesn't have to be our official list of connectors, but like it would be like, we asked, you know, you have different sectors of tech, so you could say like, we asked 2 people in health tech, this is what they said, and then people in like fintech said this, and people who, you know, I think that would be cool. Like, you would end up with different sectors, and you'd end up with like who to know
Yeah.
based on the people we think.
Right.
We already.
And it becomes like 6 degrees of
Right.
practices.
But it'd be cool to see like who thinks of the same people on that first introduction, or like people we wouldn't have thought of, or it's I think it will just also show us a bit of people's networks, like who exists in their network, who they call on when they like need help or want to know different people.
Yeah, I love that.
That's awesome.
Show us your network. Cool. All right, let's wrap up there. I'll follow up with notes certainly, but I think this is a good starting point. We'll be talking over the next month about how to keep going with this theme. And we'll certainly, you know, as we're reporting, people will tell us what they want to read, and they'll tell us what we should be paying attention to. But I'm excited for this test, this community building when we can't meet in person, exploring what that means. So thanks, everyone.